On today's episode of the show, I am joined by a person that you might recognise from conducting post-race interviews for the Indy Next series and also doing I believe the previews for the race weekends for the Indy Next series, while also commentating on the Toyota GR Cup North America series. And you might even recognise him from calling races for a sim racing channel called GSRC, or formerly known as the Global Sim Racing Channel on iRacing. And yeah, you might recognise his voice from doing the enthusiastic podium introductions in the SRO paddock as well. And that's DJ Clark. And first of all, DJ, it's good to have you on the show.
It's great to be here, Ryan. I'm super excited to be here, and yeah, I was really excited when you reached out. Always good to talk to you.
Yeah, like I was saying before we came on air, it's thanks for your time, and it's great to have you on. And there's so many questions that I want to ask as well, and kind of just like about your background and sim racing background and real life motorsport as well. But I think the first question I always ask is basically how did your interest in motorsport come around? Was your family motorsport fans, or was it kind of something that you just came across and picked up on TV?
No, my family are dyed-in-the-wool motorsport fans. I grew up about 20 minutes northwest of Indianapolis, and especially around that time, early 90s, the 500 was Christmas and New Year's and your birthday all rolled into one. And so I just grew up with it. My mom took me to the Speedway for the first time when I was about 4 years old, for the first tests for when they were going to run the Brickyard 400, because Richard Petty came out of retirement and ran the first laps in a NASCAR at IMS, and she was like, "You're going." I went to my first 500 when I was 6. It was a 2-day rain delay, 1997. And my parents yanked me out of school and said, "We're doing this." And my mother famously called the nurse and said, "DJ's sick today." And the nurse said, "Yeah, right. Where are your seats?" So I grew up with it, curling into bed on Sunday morning, watching Formula One with my dad, making Sunday afternoon plans around Champ Car at the time. In college when everybody else was out on a Saturday night party, and I'm like, "Oh, it's 2 a.m. China's on. Let's go." That it's always been a part of my life.
Yeah, and I believe as well, correct me if I'm wrong, that your first Indy 500, like you say, in 1997. I get this is the for anyone that's listening or watching, this is pretty much during the time when IndyCar, or basically CART and the IRL were they had that split at the time, and so basically CART would be having their, not Indy 500, but it would be the Michigan 500, I believe.
US 500.
Yeah, US 500, sorry. So,
Yep.
and then basically at the same time, the IRL would be having the Indy 500 on the same weekend, or I believe they done that the first year when the split happened, which was back in 1996. So, yeah, there was a bit of a divide, if you like.
Yeah, and we were very opinionated on our side, but we always went to the 500. And when I went, I'm a little 6-year-old bopping up in the stands, and all the old timers around us were very worried that they're like, "Oh God, we got a kid up here," and all of that, and throw the green flag, couple laps into the race, and they go under yellow, and I'm calling out like, "Hey, he looks loose and that car's really fast. Look at the lines that he's running," and all that. And all the old timers are going, "You are the parents of the year." And I was cheering for Ari Luyendyk on that day. I thought his name was cool. A lot of Y's, and I was like, "Oh yeah, Ari Luyendyk." And of course he ended up winning his second 500 that year, so I was a happy camper.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember I've watched that race a few times just because it's just obviously not a big Ari Luyendyk fan, but I always found it was cool that he won his second Indy 500, and I think he's one of those drivers in IndyCar in general that when it comes to the Indy 500, he never gets the credit he deserves, or that's my opinion anyway.
I'd agree with that. I think Ari on his day was incredibly quick. Obviously, the first Dutch driver to ever win. And he won in '90 and in '97, if I remember correctly. And he was always lights out. He was always a threat. And I think he was one of those drivers that really suffered as a result of the split. That had the split not happened, he would have gotten a little bit more stardom, I think, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, have you been to any other IndyCar races? Or is there any other tracks, like road courses or oval tracks that you visited?
Yeah, we went to Cleveland a couple of times, Burke Lakefront Airport. That was always a really cool one that we really loved going to. We went to Chicago World Speedway. Remember watching Montoya win that race. That was the kind of dueling track to Chicagoland that Chip Ganassi owned. We went to those two. We'd always watch. My dad would pop up and around. He always said his biggest failure in life was that he never took me to Mid Ohio. And I didn't get, I never went to Mid-O until 3 years ago. And fell in love with that place, as you can imagine. But I knew all of the tracks. I knew a lot of them, but we never really went out too far. Anything that came through Indy, we were 100% there. Whether it was NASCAR, Formula One, all of that stuff, we were there without question.
Yeah, I mean, I remember going to Indianapolis, not for the 500, but I think it was. Let me check. Yeah, 2006. I went to Indy for the F1 Grand Prix, and it's just I remember being I remember being a kid at the time, and basically my family was saying like, "Oh, we're going to America." I'm like, I just thought it would just be like a normal holiday, and then basically they never said anything, and then we turned up to. I just I remember it well, even as a kid. I just turned up and there's like a big sign at the front, I can't remember what it said exactly, but it was like basically "Welcome to Indianapolis Motor Speedway" or something like that, and I was like, I was like so excited because it wasn't the 500, but I always wanted to go to Indy just because it's one of those tracks with loads of like history and traditions, and it was just I remember watching the Grand Prix, the F1 Grand Prix there, and it was just like probably one of the best memories that I've had since when I got into watching motorsport and Formula One in general, and it's just like every time I actually go back and watch that race on YouTube, just because it's just such a cool memory to remember, and it's just like wow, it's like I've actually been to Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and it's just yeah, actually just talking about it now is giving me goosebumps.
I I'll tell you the truth. I get the same way anytime I roll up. I have a very prescribed drive that I take. Now going on 3 years of whether it's working there for IMSA or SRO, and then obviously the month of May itself. And the first time you drive up like that, it is, I still feel it. I get those goosebumps. I get that sense of excitement of, oh my goodness gracious, this is IMS. It's beyond cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think as well. More recently, you've been to the 500 just as a fan, but I think you, but since you've been getting involved with IndyCar, you've actually been. How do you actually help out in the 500 like the race week or the month of
Oh
May?
yeah.
Like, do you help out with what is it IndyCar radio?
Actually, so normally my race weekends with IndyCar are I wear many hats. So my primary job is I am the big screens announcer and presenter for IndyCar and Indy Next. So I'm on the ground, as you kind of said in the intro, doing interviews and talking to folks and doing all of that. I'll do interviews before and after sessions with drivers talking about the track. If we've got room to fill, I'll start just, talking about whatever with folks, being fun for the fans. Um, in between that, I'll go out and record some hits where it's, hey, come buy this merchandise. This is a really cool fan area, that kind of thing. And then as of last year, I started doing the pre-race ceremonies and the podium ceremonies for IndyCar and Indy Next as well. Then for the actual IndyCar race, if you ever see me like at a track, it's hilarious because I do the intro to Driver Start Your Engines and then sprint because I have to change packs to switch over to IndyCar radio, and so I'll be a pit reporter for IndyCar radio during the race. Um, the month of May is different because the month of May, IMS actually puts on their own TV program. It's almost like we're kind of running our own show. Normally, race weekends, IndyCar radio is broadcast over the PA during sessions, and that's what we hear. But because of, frankly, the history that has existed at the Speedway, whether it's Tom Carnegie, whether it's Dave Calabro, those very famous voices, we continue that tradition on and we put on our own show. So I am a pit lane reporter for everybody that's local there at the track. And it's really pretty special. It's really pretty cool. I'm there. I go back and I live in Indianapolis for 3 weeks. Which is fun. I get to see all my friends and see my family, and it's kind of a nice little, break away from things. But I'm at the track almost every single day. And I get to, be on the ground, talk to the drivers. You get a really fun rapport with the drivers because it kind of feels like summer camp. You're all there together. And then race day, I'm doing the same kind of thing that Jamie Little or Kevin Lee or Georgia Henneberry is doing for Fox. I'm just doing it on the ground for screens.
Yeah, and I mean, you talk about as well, basically having to basically kind of, I guess, like jump back and forth to having to switch from, say, IndyCar radio to Fox and the vice versa. How do you find that? Is it, I wouldn't say like not draining mentally, but does it is there times do you find it too much, or is it kind of like do you think to yourself, I'm actually lucky to be doing what I'm doing, and I don't mind having to kind of like jump back and forth, having to switch from like say like Fox to IndyCar radio and so on.
Oh, it's very much the latter. I am the luckiest guy in the world. I mean, I get to go do this. I get to fly all around the country to go to these races and get to go interview my heroes. I'm talking to Will Power and Scott Dixon and, these guys that I grew up watching, which is an indictment of my age and their age. But, it's incredible. And I'm also very, very lucky that there's a really good crew around us at Indianapolis Motor Speedway Productions that are just some of the best in the business that make me look really good. But I never once am like, oh, this is too much. If anything, I'm constantly like, I want to do more. I want to, put more on. And my producer and director are kind of reeling me back in a little bit more. I'm a workaholic. And so you put something in front of me, I'm going to go chase it.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the workaholic thing. I mean, I've noticed that since I've started or basically got back into doing podcasts this year after a 3 year break. When I came back, and I was kind of expecting to be like, I wasn't sure how it would be. Like, basically, I remember recording my first episode, and I thought when I came back, and yeah, I kind of thought to myself, am I really cut out for this? And I was kind of like, I don't know if second guessing or questioning myself is a perfect perfect way to describe it, but I was kind of saying to myself, I don't know if this will get too much for me. But honestly, since I've came back and started doing it, it's like I'm addicted to it again. I've got that kind of like, you get that buzz and adrenaline back. It's like, and it's you talk about it as well, like that you enjoy doing it. I mean, I enjoy doing it as well because I was actually looking back through some notes as well before I started before we started recording it. I've interviewed the driver from GT4. I've interviewed I don't know if you've heard of him, Graham Goodwin from Daily Sports Car. I've interviewed him. I've interviewed one of my friends from another motorsport podcast. Who else? I've actually interviewed one of your colleagues from IndyCar Radio, Mr. Ryan Marine.
Yeah, Ryan's a great guy.
honestly, it's like so those have been like highlights for me so far, and it's kind of like it's made me say to myself, I'm glad I've gotten back into doing podcasts, and
Uh,
uh, it's something I enjoy doing, and basically, as you can probably tell by trying to get my words out, it really excites me getting to do this, and like getting to interview yourself. It's like basically I count it as an honor just because I never thought I would get to interview like real life motorsport people. It's kind of I've reached out and I'm like, yeah, no one's going to say anything or reply. They'll probably just be like, oh, who's this? But honestly, it's just like puts a big smile on my face.
Good. And I am not in any position, nor will I ever be in any position to say no to you or anyone else. To quote the late great Bob Jenkins, I'm a race fan that got lucky. And at the end of the day, uh, anybody that wants to shoot the breeze about racing, I'm there. I mean, you can ask my wife. Like, apropos of nothing, I'll just start talking motorsport. So there, I'll talk about it anytime.
And then also talking about other roles that you've had as well in the basically real life motorsport. I was reading through your notes as well. You've done Twitch presenting for SRO Motorsports Group America, and
Yep.
you've also done some play by play for the. I apologize if I butcher the name. Was it the Rock
Mhm.
Cup Florida Winter Tour?
Yeah, the Twitch stuff is actually really cool. It's something we started with SRO last year. That we were, this is my fifth year with SRO. That was my first in-person job. And my first in-person job with them was actually at St. Petersburg. We were an undercard for IndyCar back in 2022 and 2023, and I will always really, really treasure St. Pete because of that. Because that was my first time working an event, and it was special. But I've been doing PA announcing with them as well as play-by-play with Toyota GR Cup, and we kind of put our heads together and thought a little bit about how to re-energize the PA booth, make it a little bit more fun, get some interactivity, and it was not my idea. I give massive credit to Taylor Bedell, our director of marketing, that she said, why don't we put cameras in the PA booth and stream it to Twitch? And so we now have a one-on-one connection with race fans, not only around the world, who can jump into the Twitch chat and ask what's going on and ask for clarification, but what's actually been really cool is we have that same interaction at the racetrack. As my former colleague Kyle Heyer would like to say, it's like you got a big screen in your pocket. You'd be able to pull up the Twitch and see what's going on and then, comment and write in there. And so there were literally times where we had marshals jumping into Twitch, letting us know what was going on an angle that we couldn't see. And it is, in my opinion, revolutionized the way that I approach broadcasting for those series. It's really cool and really special. And then Rock Cup, the Florida Winter Tour, I am lucky enough to be able to do Florida Winter Tour and Vegas Nationals with them. It's a karting organization, bunch of different classes of karting and all of that kind of stuff. I got hooked up with them last year, and absolutely fell in love with doing karting with them. They have, doing. I like to say it's a different muscle that you're using when you're going from real life commentary and sim commentary, because on the sim where I got my start, you have so much telemetry, you have so much data to fall back on and rely on if you're looking for something to talk about. Most of the time in the real world, you don't have that. And so you've got to kind of be a little bit more creative and a little bit more flowery in the way that you talk. You've got to describe a little bit more, all of those kind of things. And then when going to do karting, it is, if that is biceps and triceps, karting is your calf muscle. because it's so fast, it comes at you so quickly. You have to be able to identify helmets and numbers so much faster because 9 times out of 10, you're not having a constant updating GPS loop. That you're only getting the passes once a lap. You're getting the timing scoring update once a lap, and so it gets crazy. But for me, it is one of my favorite ways to start the racing season. Florida Winter Tour is January, February, March, obviously down in Florida, where it's a little bit warmer, and we have a blast. There's a great production team that's there. They have so much fun with us, and then we get to turn around and do it again in Vegas in November. And that is some of the best showing up. And it's super fun. We stay at the Rio. We take over the Rio parking lot. We're down there all day. Last year, it was kind of a mini honeymoon with my wife. We just got married, and then we schlepped up to Vegas, and she schlepped with me, which was wonderful. But it's a super fun time. And so very much one of those things that keeps me on my toes and continues to give me more and more ways to fall in love with motorsport.
And then you were talking about as well with the karting thing. Obviously, you don't have stuff like, I guess you don't have the. I'm guessing you have stuff like live time, but you won't have like say like a say like a live feed or production feed sort of thing. So basically, you can't you don't have that sort of thing. So I guess it's sort of is it basically like with the karting being karting races being like really fast, like you mentioned. Are you pretty much having to kind of like with not having a kind of like a monitor in front of you to watch? Are you just having to kind of like, is it kind of like guesswork in a way, like basically as the race goes on, or is it basically kind of like once the race gets going and once you like as the race goes on, does it get easier for like to kind of like remember every lap?
We actually do have a production monitor in front of us. We do get the production feed, so that's super helpful. But it obviously first races of the weekend, heat one, you're a little bit behind the eight ball, and each heat that goes along, you feel a little bit more confident. You start to learn who the players are going to be that weekend, who rolled off the truck with the right setup, that kind of thing. But as the race itself goes along, it does get a lot easier because at the beginning, you've got 30 carts diving down into turn one, and you're like, I don't know who's who and what's going on. But then by about lap 2 or 3, you'll normally see anywhere between a 2 to a 10 cart breakaway, and you kind of, out of the corner of your eye, you make a note of it on the timing and scoring screen. You're like, okay, this is the line, move it up. And then anytime you see somebody make a pass or whatever, you just sort of either make a physical note or a mental note. Okay, they moved around. I've got to remember XYZ, that kind of thing. But it's a wildly frenetic way to call a race, and I love it. It's one of those things that, you obviously do a lot of prep for it. You research the teams and all of that, but there's also an element of improv to it in that you get a lot of folks that just roll up weekend of and say, hey, we're going racing. And so there's some things that you're like, I have no idea about this guy. I got to go talk to him and figure things out. So it's pretty cool.
And you talk about going up to teams as well. Not just in that series, but I guess in general, if they say going back to IndyNext, for example, do you go up to the teams and the drivers and kind of like, do you do the same sort of thing? Like basically, do you have like a note, say like a notepad on you or something, or notebook? Sorry, they just like taking notes of what each driver, what each team says, and kind of like, and then how do you go about that preparation? Is there a process that you go through?
It depends on the weekend. There are some times that I've got time to go down and talk to them, and then there are some times that I'm running around like a chicken with my head cut off, and I don't have time. And I hate those weekends when I don't have the time to do a little bit of that research. But I normally have a notebook in my back pocket that I'll make some just brief notes about watching the sessions. It gets a little bit harder when you're on a road course because you're not, I can't watch everything that I want to. I'm only seeing the straightaway, so I'm not really seeing handling and all of that kind of thing. But when we're on an oval, I get a little bit more of my own perspective, and I go, okay, they're doing this, they're doing that. I wonder what the car's doing here, X, Y, Z. And I will, whether it's IndyCar, Indy Next, SRO, whatever, I always go through the pits and the paddock. And, thankfully I've been doing this long enough that folks know me. And, I'm very careful about, standard journalist practices, off the record kind of things. They know that they're like, yeah, off the record, we suck. Like I'm not going to turn around and say that on air. And so you just get to develop a rapport with a lot of the folks. I have really good relationships with some mechanics. I have really good relationships with a lot of the drivers. I have really good relationships, up and down all of the pit lanes. And you just go in and, sometimes it's as simple as, what's the car feeling like today? What do you guys need to work on? How's XYZ? Sometimes it's, how you feeling about this weekend? You got some confidence? You a little lacking? What are you thinking? And sometimes it's just going up being like, they bin the car. I did that this weekend. When Felix Rosen, we were, obviously it said I'm headed off to Arlington next weekend. This is right after the Phoenix race. I went into Meyer Shank after Felix had the wreck in qualifying, or in practice rather. And, talked to Mike Shank. And I said, how's it looking? And he said, we're not going to make it up for qualifying. I was like, practice? He's maybe. And I did the same with Fro when I saw him later on. It's, you just kind of develop those things and you get those relationships going.
Yeah, and talking about that as well, obviously, you mentioned as well, basically, talking to the driver and building up that, kind of like building up a connection, if you like. Basically, do you find that the more, like you say, like the more you talk to drivers, like the more you get to know them, you build a connection, and then basically you kind of get to know their, I don't know if personality is the right word, but basically you get an idea of what they're like to speak to. Do you find that helps, and do you find that actually, I don't know if you get nervous or not, still talking to drivers, but do you find that actually you don't have to worry about talking to drivers, because by basically the more you speak to them, basically it's like the more you speak to them, the more relaxed you feel?
I mean, I will tell you right now, I still get nervous talking to Scott Dixon, because he's Scott Dixon. He's the one that I get starstruck by. But for the most part, you kind of understand that there's an implicit understanding when you're doing a job like this that, hey, I got to do a job that's asking you questions. And that back and forth, and you do get to develop really good relationships. You do get to develop, friendships in the paddock. And, there are some drivers that I know I can go to no matter what. If things are tough, I can immediately just be like, all right, going to this person. No questions asked. And you just kind of build that relationship over time. I will tell you, one of my relationships that I always feel good about is going up to Pato Award. And part of that was built off of, at the 500, I have the worst job in the world. I have to interview the guy who came second at the Indianapolis 500. And 2 years ago, that was Pato. And, for race fans, you remember he was absolutely disconsolate. I mean, just crying and heartbroken, wore his heart on his sleeve as he always does. And I had to stick a mic in his face. And, say, we saw you crying. How devastated are you right now? I forget what my exact phrasing was. But that next weekend in Detroit, he was in the bullpen and he was just kind of walking around, and I pulled him aside. I said, hey, man, I'm sorry I had to do that. Like, I wanted to just kind of let you be, and I wanted you to just feel the feels. And, he and I had this really lovely moment that he's like, dude, you're doing your job. He's like, it's okay. And ever since then, Pato and I have been great. And I have very similar relationships with a lot of other drivers up and down the grid that I know I can always go to. And that they know that they have to wave me off for whatever reason, it's not personal. Um, and that's what I tell, at St. Pete 2 weeks ago when I was meeting a lot of the young Indy Next drivers for the first time. That's kind of how I lead into it, is I say, hey, my name's DJ. This is my job. I'm going to be coming to you for interviews over the course of the season. If you ever don't want to talk to me, wave me off. No hard feelings. And the smart ones, the smart Indy Next drivers, they're like, no, you come to me as much as you want, because they know publicity. And the more they get on the screen is better for them. So that's the give and take that you kind of have to deal with.
And then going back to the Pato Award as well, finishing second at Indy. How do obviously I think it's a question I asked Ryan Marine as well. Obviously he commentates on the GT World Challenge America, and it's something I asked, something similar I asked him as well. Basically, with Pato, for example, like you mentioned, obviously he was kind of basically, you would probably expect him to be like, oh, I don't want to speak to anyone that's basically maybe still heated up, or maybe just too upset like he was, which is understandable because he came so close to winning one of the biggest races in his career. And yeah, some fans might say like, yeah, second place is still a good finish, but it's a phrase that I remember ages ago, and I still remember it very well. It's basically no one remembers second. So, but how did you approach Pato? Obviously, you said that Pato was basically, he was like all good and all fine with you doing your job. But were you a bit more cautious? Did you take a different approach to like approaching him, or was it basically kind of like, like you say, you're doing your job and I have to do this, or is there a bit of a consideration in the back of your mind?
Oh no, there's at least from my perspective and my approach to interviewing and broadcasting and all of that. I'm a very animated person. I have a lot of emotion, and I'm not afraid to express that. And so for me, I let that show. And if I'm feeling for somebody, I'm going to change the way I approach them. Even if it's just a vocal inflection, coming from hey, you just wanted to like Pato Award down here, so close. We can obviously see the emotion that is going through, that kind of thing. You do change that up. And in my life and in my line of work, I have been lucky enough to have two really great producers on the IndyCar side of things, Kevin and R. Dave, that have really coached me along how to kind of bring that out, as well as coaching me in the moment. And part of that was with Pato, in that moment, there were so many fans that were still there, and bringing attention to the fans and letting him have a moment with the fans was really big. And you also just kind of, you read off of cues. You read off of what's in front of you, and you adjust your energy based off of that. And there are some interviews that are always going to be a little off kilter. You interview Will Power, you never know what you're going to get. It's a question mark. But I love it, and I love Will, and he's one of my favorite drivers. He's great. But his interviews are always kind of hilarious.
Yeah, some people give Will Power a lot of stick. Some people say he's a bit too. Some fans say, or some people say, like he's a bit, or have in the past when he was at Team Penske, he was a bit kind of like up himself. He was a bit kind of like arrogant, or had a bit of an ego. But I've actually found, in my view anyway, I found kind of like in his later years, I think it was probably like the last 1 or 2 years at Penske before he left at the end of last season, and I think I've noticed since he's joined the Andretti and the IndyCar for this season, I think he's a lot more relaxed. He's not as tense, or he's not kind of like he's not, I wouldn't say defensive, but he's kind of like, he's a lot more kind of like open and kind of like honest, if you like.
Yeah, there's a sense of honesty. I think it's a little hard to judge because of how rough St. Pete was. And I didn't really have a lot of time to interact with him in Phoenix. It was a bit of a weird show from Screen's perspective. That I wasn't doing my traditional interview sessions as much as I normally would. I was doing a lot more work with IndyCar Radio. Um, but I chatted with Will at the Indy 8 Hour, which he was able to run this year, and had a good long conversation with him. And I've always found Will to be. He's not standoffish. I don't think arrogant or anything like that is the right word. He's just Will. And you just kind of have to be like, okay, he is who he is unabashedly, and that's one of the things that makes him so great. Is he is just unabashedly willpower.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't say I'm a fan of him, but that's why I like Will, because he's not afraid to express, like, basically be himself. He's not like as I like to call him. He's not like a PR robot, if you like. He's
No.
kind of like he's willpower. He's his own man, and
Yeah.
it's why I'm Scott Dixon. By the way, you can probably tell I'm a Scott
I
Dixon
could
fan.
I saw PNC, yeah.
I'm a Scott Dixon fan because he's kind of. I like the way he goes about his racing, like basically off track. He's not like in interviews. He's not kind of like he's not up himself, if you like. He's not arrogant or anything like that. He's just kind of like he's typical Scott Dixon. He's the Iceman, and basically he's
Yeah.
always come across as really approachable to the fans, to the media, and that's why I like him. And it's basically he's not. In an interview, he won't try and kind of like he's not like really kind of like fired up, if you like. If he's had a bad race, it's kind of like, yeah, this happened. I remember I think it was St. Pete last year when he could have won that race, but he was having issues with like his radio, I think, and basically
Yeah.
he ended up getting held up by traffic. And I remember his interview so well. I think it was the only time in my experience of being a Scott Dixon and an IndyCar fan in general, it's probably the only time I've seen Scott Dixon get fired up and even swear during an interview. I think he said something like, "Oh, yeah." He's like, "Oh, how?" I think he got asked, "How do you feel?" And then basically he said something like, "Oh, I'm pissed off because we could have won that race." And I was like, "Wow, this is Scott Dixon being fired up." I'm like, I was like, crikey.
Yeah.
So
Well, and the other thing that Scott does that I really appreciate, and it's something that I've noticed across any sort of sport when you do the sideline interviews or whatever, is Scott will always thank you. When you get done with an interview, and I do that all the time. When they get done, I always shout out hey, appreciate you, thank you, to acknowledge. Like, they don't have to talk to me. It's not in their contract that they have to talk to Screens. But Scott goes out of his way to kind of pat you on the shoulder and be like, thanks, buddy. And it's for somebody on the other side of that, especially somebody who's younger like me, trying to make a name for myself, that kind of thing. It means the world. It's a lot, and while I'm a Colts fan, Patrick Mahomes does the same thing for the Chiefs in American football, and I've really noticed. I picked up on that, and I was like, that tells me a lot about who that guy is as a person.
yeah, I mean, I think it's a thing I like about it's probably IndyCar racing when it comes to open wheel racing, just because probably probably some of the drivers you think are maybe not approachable, or maybe just because of the way they come across on TV, but it's probably one of those sort of things. But away from the track, or basically when there's nothing going on, drivers are probably like probably a lot more open, relaxed, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And but I think I can't remember. I can't remember ages ago. I think it was on Twitter sometime. Was it Twitter? It might have been Twitter. I can't remember. But I remember sending a message to I think it was Scott Dixon at the time, actually. But this is like ages ago when Twitter was still kind of becoming a thing. I sent a message saying like, oh, like basically like congratulations on your win, and blah blah, and basically I was like, yep. I sent a message, if I don't hear anything, then I won't take it personally. And I think it was maybe probably 3 or 4 days after, he sent me a message saying, "Oh, thank you so much for your message, and that really means a lot. And basically, thanks for supporting me." And I was like,
That's Scott in a nutshell.
Yeah,
That's who Scott is.
it really meant a lot to me as a fan because basically I know he was probably busy with doing like say like PR stuff or basically traveling to the next race, but that really kind of made my day. And I've always been a huge fan of Scott for that reason, just for his interaction with the fans. And then I think as well, I was meaning to ask as well, there was something else I was wanting to ask as well. But obviously moving on to sim racing, how did your involvement with sim racing come about? Was it kind of a game? Was it just kind of as a kid? Did you come across like basically say like some of like old like PlayStation games? Maybe say like the old F1 games, for example.
Um, I started back really getting into. I played the old. I can't remember which ones they were, but the old PC games. Um, it's not Codemasters. I can't remember the name of the company who had it, who had the contract. But at that point, playing on a joystick, that was how my family did that. And I graduated a little bit. I got an Xbox and, would play Forza and those kind of things and have a good time with that. But my way of like really getting into and then of course when Codemasters took over the F1 contract, I would play all those. I would play those religiously. I would literally when I was in college, I would, study for a while, go do a race, come back and study, go do a race. Like that was my break. But the way I really got into it was actually through the job that I was working at the time. So I worked in Hollywood for 10 years. And I was working at an independent studio and trying to come up with unscripted TV pitches to, make that break up and come up with a show. And so I came up with a fun idea that was like, all right, what if we put James Hinchcliffe and Dale Earnhardt Jr. as hosts? You get 10 people together, you put them in simulators, coach them. If they win the race after at the end of the episode, they get $5,000. Then you put them up against Dale or Hinch, and if they beat them, $50,000. Something crazy like that. Just a crazy idea. So I was like, oh, this could be kind of fun. And I had heard about iRacing kind of tangentially. Like I knew it was a thing, but I didn't really dive into it. And I did a bunch of research and was like, wow, this is incredible, and did all that kind of stuff. Pitch ended up going nowhere. Long story. But cut to about a year and a half later, I was just kind of like, yeah, I want to do this. And found iRacing and started on a laptop. With a non-force feedback wheel and pedals that I bought for like $150. And fell in love with it. And then, ended up getting a nice gaming PC and did that and was on the desk clamp setup for the longest time. And then about a year and a half ago, I finally bit the bullet and I bought a full sim. I bought a full cockpit, dedicated PC for it, whole 9 yards. And that's really and truly how I got into commentary and how I got into my job is I and you'll appreciate this coming from Global Sim Racing Channel and GSRC.
Yep.
I was in love with IndyCar and that was my goal to run. And when I started sim racing, I started watching sim broadcasts to figure out how the best could do it. And I started watching Lionheart, which was a series put together by now a friend, George Anzaldo. And it really became my North Star that I was like working to be able to do that. And then, of course, the pandemic hit in 2020. And I just kept watching the sim broadcast because I'm a junkie and I needed my racing fix. Um, and then I saw a post on Reddit that somebody said, how do you become a commentator for these channels? And they're like, just email them. And so I emailed Joe Peak, and Joe and I are now best of friends. He was at my wedding. Um, and the rest is history. And now Joe and I are off bopping around the country yelling about race cars in real life.
Yeah, it's sort of similar to how I got involved with GSRC because at the time I was a commentator for on iRacing for Apex Racing TV, but just stuff behind the scenes happened. Not from my side, but basically, yeah, one of the owners came to me and said like, "Oh, we're letting you go," and basically, yeah, they didn't say it outright, but basically, I knew what they were getting at because they probably you notice that a few times I struggle with a stutter from time to time. So basically, we're letting you go, but they didn't say outright why. But
Yeah.
I knew the reason, but it's yeah, I don't stress about it. It's one of those things that like I always struggle with, but it's like I don't like to get at me now. It's basically if I stutter, I stutter. But yeah, going back to the opportunity to join GSRC, I think it was sort of similar. I think it was Sean Ambrose that sent me a message and said, "It's like, hey, I heard what happened with you in Apex TV. Basically, the way they treated you, like basically, he even said it outright. The way they treated you and let you go was basically just it was just complete crap." So he's like, if you're interested, we're always looking for commentators. And I was like, hell yeah, I'm interested. And so my opportunity to join was back in, oh, it must be going back about, yeah, I think it was about 2020, 2021, I think, or round about that time. Basically, he said like if you want to get involved here, basically you'll get by you won't be thrown into commentating straight away. You'll kind of like observe what
Yep.
goes on and how the broadcast works and what goes on behind the scenes. And I was like, yeah, I mean, I said that's fine, that's better than nothing. I mean, I prefer to do it that way instead of being kind of like thrown in. It gives me an idea of how broadcasts work and how everything's set up and that sort of thing. And I actually preferred to do it that way because it gave me a chance to take some notes down and basically
Yep.
like observe how everyone commentates, basically what style they use and how they do it and how they predict or how they announce races and I don't get a chance to do sim racing commentating as much these days just because of work commitments and other stuff going on. So, but yeah, honestly, I would say to anyone that's looking to maybe get into real life motorsport commentating if they want to use sim racing as a platform to kind of prepare them in advance for going into real life commentating. Do you find do you that's a good question. Do you find sim racing commentating does that help you for prepare for real life commentating? And is there anything from real life that you can use on the sim?
Yeah. I mean, I felt very prepared coming in. Because of the multitude of races that I had called and worked for and however much that I had done, that getting that muscle up to snuff on the sim was invaluable. And then coming from real life over to the sim, I've found stylistically there are things that I take over. And it's not just from real life where I work. I'm a huge sports junkie just across the board. I love all kinds of sports, whether it's everything from the NFL to the Premier League to the Olympics, whatever there is, I'm going to watch it. And so I noticed that I listen to the commentators more and more. And one of the things that I've really noticed is when I listen back to old tapes of myself, in particular, I would always think I needed to fill, that there couldn't be any dead air, and that I had to fill that up with my voice and keep talking no matter what. And the truth is to me, if you listen to some of the best, and I've really taken this from, I think, the more British perspective in the Premier League in particular, I should say English if I'm talking Premier League, laying off and not being afraid of that silence. In the motorsport world, if you listen to Lee Diffie, Diff is the best at that. The Diffie knows exactly when to come in and set the scene and then let his co-commentators fill in the paint strokes, fill in the brush strokes. And that's one of the biggest things that I take away. And now when I come back into the sim, I do it for fun. I do it to keep the muscle sharp over the off season. And there are some broadcasts that people reach out to me and they're like, it'll be like a Thursday and they're like, hey, can you come in Saturday? I'm like, dude, you got to book me farther ahead than that. But there are other times that, they're like a month away. They're like, hey, can you do this? I'm like, yeah, why not? It'll be fun. So I'm always willing and able to come in. I don't have iRacing on my desktop anymore. So I just run it off a Discord feed, but it's kind of more real to real life, which I kind of like in that sense.
Yeah, and I mean, as well, sim racing as well. Do you find, or have you found that sim racing has it led to opportunities opening up for you in real life motorsport? So, for example, if someone maybe contacted you and said like, "Oh, I've listened to you, like I've watched your broadcast and listened to your stuff on say iRacing, for example," would you be interested in commentating on a real life series, for example? Is it kind of open doors for you?
That's exactly what happened with SRO. I reached out to SRO actually after a conversation with the aforementioned Ryan Marine. That I reached out to them, said, "Hey, do you guys need any help?" They said, "Yeah, we'd love to have you in on some sim stuff." Did a couple of sim things with them, and then that transmuted into the PA gig that I now hold with SRO. And certainly early on in my career, it wasn't necessarily, I won't say it was a, hey, we've seen your sim stuff, would you like to go do this in real life? I had to chase it a lot harder, but it gave me a reel that I could show I knew what I was doing. If that makes sense. So it allowed me to put together something that was like, hey, I'm not an idiot. Like, I know how to call a race. And, over time, that reel has shifted, it has evolved, and now it is strictly real life stuff. But certainly when I was starting out, it was invaluable to have that.
And then moving on to real life motorsport as well, basically, when was your first opportunity to commentate on real life? I think I'm guessing it was the opportunity that you spoke about just now with the SRO esports stuff, and then basically, I guess, like you say, that transferred over to the commentating in real life for SRO Motorsports.
Yeah, that would have been late February, early March of 2022, doing GT America at the Grand Prix of St. Pete. That was my first one. I was signed on for the full season with SRO, which was super cool to be able to do that year. I think it was that year. I also got to do PA for Formula E at the New York City E-Prix, which was surreal. So that was really cool. And yeah, I mean, it's just kind of ping-ponged and momentum of a snowball rolling down a hill from there, really and truly.
And then also as well I think I asked Ryan Marine the same question, but I can't remember. But what would your advice be for anyone that wants to get into real life or commentating on real life motorsport? Is there would you say to them basically kind of go to your local club track? So say for example like the FCCA Super Hoosier Tour, for example, would you advise them to try something like that, or maybe say like I don't know how to explain it, but basically go to like the local track and maybe try and to kind of like volunteer to do some commentating and get experience that way? Or would you advise them to maybe go through sim racing first? Sim racing commentating first, sorry.
Everything you can. Sim is obviously going to be the easiest for you to get into because there's just more opportunity available and all of that. Obviously, you and I kind of were doing it at the golden age of sim racing, right in the middle of the pandemic when nobody had anything else to do. So, the days of being able to kind of make an income doing sim racing isn't really feasible anymore. But I would do that. I would go to your local track and I would send emails, try to find emails from folks who you know and who you respect in the commentary world, and ask the question, how'd you do this? What advice would you give? Build those connections. As much as I love networking, it's a huge thing, and that is a huge part of success, is just building those relationships forward. And the other thing is, and this is true in anything, just don't be a jerk. Don't be a prima donna, be down to earth, be chill, be a good hang. I sound super Californian when I say that, but, just be a fun person to be around, and people are going to want to work with you. That more than anything, I think is the best bit of unsung advice to give.
Yeah, I mean, it's not commentating, but I've noticed that with like doing the podcast, basically reaching out to people like, oh, would you be interested? And I kind of do. I don't. I guess it is a pitch in a way, but I normally send like a. I can't remember the name of the website. It's like Linktree or something like that. Sort of like a bio sort of thing. So basically, this is the platforms that my podcast is on. So Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and I'll send them a link to my page, say, just in case they want to listen to it before they decide if they want to come on. So it's probably not the same as commentating, but I do that as well. Kind of like send out basically this is what I do, this is what I talk about, kind of just to give them an idea. And I think I actually find in that way as well that you build up a connection. It might just be for a podcast, but you're giving them the impression that you take it serious, and they'll probably think, yeah, he does take it serious, and they probably listen and say like, oh, he's really enthusiastic, he loves doing interviews, and yeah, it's like, yeah, why not? Why not they jump on and do an interview and kind of just and I guess in a way for drivers as well, or commentators even, it helps them get their name out there and basically gives people an impression of this person's he's relaxed, he's laid back, he doesn't have an ego or anything like that. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, one of my mantras has always been, take the work seriously, don't take yourself seriously. I am the first that is willing to make fun of myself. Anything like that. Even with the drivers, I'll be self-deprecating and, crap on myself and do those kind of things. And yeah, but when push comes to shove, you show up, you be there 5 minutes early, you do everything you can to be punctual and be professional and all of that. But, you have a laugh at yourself when you screw up. And, the flip of that is, and I am the worst one at this, is don't be too critical on yourself. Especially when you're starting out, you're going to make mistakes. We work commentating in any field is improv. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what it is. And I don't care if you're Kristen Wiig or John Belushi, you're going to make mistakes because you're doing this off the top of your head. I literally just saw, before we jumped on, Mike Joy spoke out of turn and said something wrong about
Alex Bowman.
Alex Bowman over the course of the weekend at the Phoenix race, and he apologized for it. And that's going to happen. And Joy's one of the best in the business.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed that when I first brought my podcast back, when I first recorded my first return episode, if you like, back in January, I think it was. Like one of my another podcaster that I'm good friends with, basically, I ended up making a mistake because the episode I thought it'll only be like 1 hour long, and then basically I asked how long was that. It was like 2 hours. I'm like, but it was a mistake. It's just because I was having so much fun at the time, and I apologised and said like, oh, I'm so sorry, I went on for too long, and I was like, I was fine at the time, and basically she said, oh, don't worry about it. It's your first time back doing a podcast, so you're bound to make mistakes. And then I think it was the day. It was actually the Saturday and Sunday, kind of like Saturday I was fine, and then basically I was listening to it back. I was like, oh, why did I do this? Why did I say that? And oh, I shouldn't have done this, or I stuttered too much, and I was really kind of like beating myself up to the point it kind of like got to me mentally, and I was like, my friend that I done the podcast recording with, she's like, just calm down, excuse me, just calm down, just relax. You don't need to get stressed up and beat yourself up. And I was like, yeah, but I don't want people thinking, oh, why is he saying this or doing that? And I was just getting really to the point. I was like, kind of messed with me big time, and it probably took me like a few days to kind of get over. But it's something I've learned as well, that, like you say, yeah, you're going to make mistakes, or something. It might not be perfect, but no one's going to like basically kind of jump on your back or say anything. It's part of learning.
Yeah, exactly. Couldn't have said it better myself.
But and then looking ahead to, it's a question I wanted to ask you about your kind of like your podium introductions. I've noticed this a lot. I mean, I love it, especially what's in the SRO broadcast. It's like basically you can hear in the background when you do the podium introductions. Like I hear you shouting in the background, and I'm like, as DJ, I'm like, I love that enthusiasm. Like, is there a way that you build up to it, or is it kind of like it's like, you know what, I'm just going to kind of burst out of it and get enthusiastic?
For podiums, it's pretty much straight out of the gate. For driver intros for IndyCar, we've really kind of like finessed it out, and I definitely have a build to it. And it's funny, man. Like I don't know where that came from. I don't know. The first podium I ever did was Watkins Glen, I think in 22 is when I did that. And, I just did it. They were like, get excited. I was like, all right. And, got the growl and did all that, and everybody loved it. And I'm like, all right, I'll just keep doing this. To the point that they asked me to do it for IndyCar 2 years ago at Laguna Seca. And I was like, all right, like, I'll do it. And, and all of the powers that be that IndyCar's like, we need to let him do this all the time. And now I do it for every race, and it's fun. Really and truly, I like to say it's kind of my way of giving back a little bit. That I want the drivers to have a little fun with it. I want the drivers to get pumped. I want them to feel that excitement. The commentary is the art. The podiums are the bubble gum.
And then basically as well, for basically looking ahead to the rest of 2026, have you got any other plans in the pipeline, or is there anything lined up, like commentary wise, or is it just because I know you were mentioning before we started recording that you're you've got reduced appearances for SRO this year, I believe.
Yeah, so I will be I'm on for the full IndyCar in Indy next season. I'll be at every round with them. I will be at the majority of races for SRO Motorsports Group America. You can always see those on Twitch or on YouTube. Or we've signed a deal with Fox, so you can see those live on there as well. I will be back as the lead voice for GR Cup North America, which I'm very excited about. I love Toyota GR Cup. I will be doing just some MC work with IMSA at Detroit and Long Beach, which I'm really excited about. And then I will also be doing some stuff on the ground for Battle on the Bricks, the IMSA race at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. I think I'm doing Rock Cup in November. I haven't heard any contrary to that, so that's still on the board. And then I do believe that I will be back doing some sim stuff with SRO for PRI. And there's a couple other balls in the air right now that may come true. TBD. Fingers crossed. But who knows? It's one of the kind of scary things about this job is that every year it resets for the most part. I'm lucky enough with IMS that they've kept me on for 3 years, despite the the switch over from Fox, or switch over from NBC to Fox last year, and I make enough to provide for me and my family, and I get to do what I love, and that's all I need.
Yeah, it's great to hear, and I look forward to listening to or watching the Toyota GR Cup because it's become one of my favorite series just because it's basically anywhere you look throughout the field, there's loads of great racing, there's a bit of door rubbing, door banging,
Yep.
but I think that's what appeals to me because it's not like say like your typical like high downforce cars like say like GT cars or prototypes or anything like that. It's more down to the driver to wring the neck out of the car, and that's why I love that series.
Yeah, it's super fun, and seeing him race on a street course this weekend in Arlington is going to be really exciting. I think that long back straightaway is going to make for some very interesting moves.
Yeah, I've heard mixed reviews about Arlington. Some fans are saying it's not their cup of tea, and other fans, especially myself, I'm actually looking forward to it just because it's a new track and new tracks you don't know what to expect.
I think it's going to be great. I want to give massive credit to Penske Promotions and IndyCar, as well as Jerry Jones and the Cowboys and the Rangers organizations for putting everything together on this. Because they have promoted the bejesus out of this thing, and well deserved. I mean, we were watching the Cup race last weekend, and they're talking about it, and I think this has the potential to be a really special race for IndyCar.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it as well. And before we let you go, DJ, is there anyone that you want to give a shout out to? Or is there any socials that you want to promote?
Yeah, I'm at the DJ Clark pretty much everywhere, so go ahead and check me out there. Fair warning, it's pictures of race cars, pictures of my wife, or pictures of my cats. Also want to give a huge shout out to my wife, who somehow puts up with my constant traveling and yelling about race cars, and still loves me despite of it. So she's kind of the best.
And then before we wrap up as well, if anyone wants to follow the show, you can follow the show on Spotify by searching the Satellite Racing Podcast. You can look up or you can follow the Satellite Podcast on Twitter or X by searching at the Sat Racing Cast, and also Satellite Racing Cast on the Instagram as well. But yeah, it's been great to have you on, DJ, and look forward to listening to your stuff and watching your stuff as the season goes on. And yeah, again, thanks for joining us, and thank you to anyone that listens to this episode. And we will see you next time.